They boycotted my Carnegie Hall debut because it would overshadow my sister's superior talent. Now she's been dropped by her label while I'm touring internationally. Growing up in our house meant living with constant background music and the suffocating weight of expectations that were never meant for me. From the moment my sister could hold a violin, our parents transformed our living room into a shrine dedicated to her musical destiny. The walls were covered with certificates from youth competitions, photos of her with various instructors, and newspaper clippings highlighting her performances at local venues. Meanwhile, my own musical achievements were relegated to a small corner of the refrigerator, held up by magnets advertising pizza places. Every morning started the same way. My sister would practice scales while I ate breakfast, the sound of her violin floating through the house like a daily reminder of where the family priorities lay. Our parents would hover around her practice sessions, timing her exercises and taking notes about her technique. When I practiced piano in the afternoon, they'd usually be in another room, discussing her upcoming competitions or researching new teachers who might elevate her performance to the next level. The differences in how we were treated became more obvious as we got older. When my sister needed a new instrument, our parents would research for months, visiting specialty shops and consulting with multiple experts before spending thousands on the perfect violin. When my keyboard started having sticky keys that affected my playing, I was told to make do until after my sister's next competition. The message was clear without anyone having to say it directly. School concerts were particularly painful experiences. My parents would arrive early to get the best seats when my sister performed, often bringing extended family members and recording everything on multiple devices. During my performances, I'd scan the audience to find them checking their phones or having whispered conversations. The applause they gave me always felt polite rather than enthusiastic, like they were going through the motions of being supportive parents. The real turning point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been working incredibly hard on a piece that meant everything to me, spending hours perfecting every phrase and dynamic marking. When I played it for my family, expecting some recognition of the progress I'd made, my mother simply nodded and said it was pleasant. Pleasant. The word stung more than any direct criticism could have. It was dismissive in a way that made me feel invisible. That same week, my sister played a piece she'd learned in half the time, and our parents couldn't stop talking about her natural gift and how effortlessly music seemed to flow through her. They used words like extraordinary and transcendent to describe her playing, while mine was always just pleasant or nice. The vocabulary they chose revealed everything about how they saw our respective futures in music. College applications became another source of tension in our house. My parents spent countless hours helping my sister craft the perfect audition recordings, hiring a professional videographer and renting a concert hall for the best acoustics. When it came time for my applications, I was mostly on my own, recording in our living room with whatever equipment we had available. The contrast wasn't lost on me, but I learned to expect it by then. The acceptance letters that arrived that spring changed everything in ways none of us anticipated. My sister got into a decent program, but I received an offer from one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country, along with a significant scholarship that would cover most of my expenses. Instead of celebrating this achievement, our parents seemed confused and almost disappointed, as if my success somehow disrupted their carefully constructed narrative about which daughter was destined for greatness. During my college years, I threw myself into music with an intensity that surprised even me. Being away from the constant comparisons allowed me to discover my own artistic voice without the shadow of family expectations. I practiced for hours every day, not because someone was timing me or taking notes, but because I finally felt free to explore what music meant to me personally. My professors noticed this passion and began recommending me for opportunities that I never would have imagined possible. Meanwhile, my sister's college experience seemed to be following the trajectory our parents had always envisioned. She won several campus competitions and was featured in promotional materials for her program. Our parents would share these achievements on social media with lengthy captions about how proud they were to have raised such a talented musician. My own accomplishments during this time were acknowledged with brief congratulations before conversations quickly shifted back to my sister's latest success. The invitation to perform at Carnegie Hall arrived on a Tuesday afternoon that I'll never forget. I was in my practice room when my phone rang, and the voice on the other end explained that they'd heard my recording from a recent competition and wanted to offer me a solo performance slot. I had to ask them to repeat the information 3 times because it felt too incredible to be real. Carnegie Hall was every classical musician's dream venue, and they were offering it to me. When I called home to share the news, the reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. Instead of excitement, there was an uncomfortable silence followed by questions about timing and whether this might interfere with my sister's upcoming auditions. My mother's first concern was how this news might affect my sister's confidence, as if my achievement was somehow a threat to her success rather than something worth celebrating on its own merits. The conversation that followed revealed just how deep the family dynamics really ran. My parents explained that they were worried about the pressure this might put on my sister, who was still working toward her first major professional opportunity. They suggested that perhaps it would be better if I kept the Carnegie Hall performance quiet until after my sister had secured her position with an orchestra. The implication was that my success should be hidden to protect her feelings. Over the following weeks, I watched my family's reaction to my Carnegie Hall invitation with growing disappointment. While I was preparing for what should have been the most important performance of my life up to that point, my parents were focused on helping my sister with her auditions and networking with people who might advance her career. The contrast in their levels of investment was stark and painful. The decision about whether they would attend my performance created tension that filled our house for months. I could hear them having hushed conversations in the kitchen, debating whether their presence at my concert might somehow undermine my sister's artistic development. They worried that supporting me too visibly might send the wrong message about which daughter they believed in more strongly. As the performance date approached, their absence became increasingly certain. They explained their decision using language that made it sound like they were making a sacrifice for the greater good of the family's musical legacy. They talked about not wanting to create unnecessary pressure or disrupt the delicate balance of artistic development that they'd spent years cultivating. Everything they said made my achievement sound like an inconvenience rather than a triumph. The night of my Carnegie Hall debut, I walked onto that iconic stage knowing that the most important people in my life had chosen not to witness this moment. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was performing for a hall full of strangers who appreciated my music more than my own family did. The performance itself was everything I'd hoped it would be, but the emotional weight of my family's absence made it bittersweet in ways that took years to fully process. Update 1. The months following my Carnegie Hall performance brought changes that none of us had anticipated. While my family was focused on my sister's auditions and the beginning of her professional career, my own opportunities began multiplying in ways that caught everyone off guard. The Carnegie Hall performance had opened doors I didn't even know existed, leading to invitations from venues and orchestras across the country. My sister did eventually land a position with a regional orchestra, which our parents celebrated as the fulfillment of everything they'd worked toward. Photos from her first professional performance were framed and displayed prominently throughout the house, replacing some of the childhood competition certificates that had decorated our walls for years. The narrative they constructed about her destined path seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. Meanwhile, I was navigating a completely different trajectory that my family seemed to view with a mixture of confusion and mild annoyance. The opportunities coming my way didn't fit into their understanding of how musical careers were supposed to develop. They'd spent so many years focused on traditional paths and conventional markers of success that my unconventional journey made them uncomfortable. The recording contract I signed 6 months after Carnegie Hall created the first real crack in their carefully constructed worldview. When I called to share the news, the silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that I wondered if the call had been dropped. Eventually, my mother managed to say congratulations, but her tone suggested she was more bewildered than proud. The idea that I might be achieving things they'd always dreamed of for my sister simply didn't compute. During this time, I started noticing subtle changes in my sister's behavior that concerned me. She seemed more anxious than usual, constantly worried about her performances and unusually secretive about her practice routine. When I visited home, I'd find her in the music room at odd hours, working with an intensity that felt different from the natural passion our parents had always praised. Something about her approach to music seemed forced rather than effortless. The first international tour invitation arrived while I was visiting home for the holidays. Reading the email aloud to my family created an atmosphere of stunned silence broken only by the sound of my sister's violin case falling to the floor. My parents struggled to respond appropriately, clearly unprepared for news that positioned me as the internationally recognized musician they'd always expected my sister to become. Over dinner that night, the conversation kept returning to logistics and concerns rather than celebration. My parents worried about the demands of international travel and whether I was prepared for the pressures of representing American musicians abroad. They raised questions about my ability to handle the responsibility, despite having never expressed similar concerns about my sister's career aspirations. The double standard was becoming impossible to ignore. My sister's reaction was the most troubling part of that evening. Instead of the sibling rivalry I might have expected, she seemed genuinely distressed, almost panic-stricken about my success. She kept asking detailed questions about my practice routine and preparation methods, as if she were trying to reverse engineer something she felt she was missing. The conversation made me realize that the pressure our parents had placed on her might have been more damaging than any of us understood. The tour itself was everything I dreamed of and more. Performing in concert halls across Europe and Asia, working with world-class orchestras, and experiencing different musical traditions firsthand expanded my understanding of what it meant to be a professional musician. Each performance built my confidence and confirmed that I belonged on these stages, regardless of what my family had believed about my potential. During my time abroad, I tried to stay connected with my family through regular calls and messages. However, our conversations felt increasingly strained as the gap between their expectations and my reality continued to widen. They seemed to struggle with how to process my achievements, often responding to my news with questions about when I planned to return home rather than enthusiasm about my experiences. The most difficult call came midway through the tour when my sister's orchestra announced budget cuts that eliminated several positions, including hers. The devastation in my mother's voice as she explained what had happened revealed just how much their identity had become wrapped up in my sister's musical career. They'd invested so much in the idea of her success that this setback felt like a personal failure rather than an unfortunate but common industry challenge. When I offered to help my sister explore other opportunities or even to use my new connections to open doors for her, the offer was declined with a politeness that felt like rejection. My parents seemed to believe that accepting help from me would somehow diminish my sister's achievements or compromise the narrative they'd built about her independent talent. Their pride was getting in the way of practical solutions. The disconnect between my growing international recognition and my family's response to it created an emotional distance that I struggled to bridge. While music critics were writing reviews that described my performances in terms my parents had once reserved for my sister, my family seemed incapable of adjusting their perspective. They remained fixated on a version of reality that no longer matched what was actually happening. Update 2. The news that changed everything arrived through a music industry blog that I read during a break between rehearsals in Vienna. The headline was stark and devastating, announcing that my sister had been dropped by her record label following allegations of performance enhancement and lip-syncing during recorded sessions. The article detailed an investigation that had uncovered evidence of widespread deception in her recent recordings and live performances. Reading those words felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Everything our parents had built their dreams around was crumbling in the most public way possible. The sister they proclaimed as naturally gifted, the one whose talent they described as pure and effortless, had apparently been cheating in ways that called into question every achievement they'd celebrated over the years. The phone call I made home that day was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. My parents were devastated, not just by the professional consequences but by the complete destruction of their understanding of who my sister was as a musician. They'd spent decades building an identity around her supposed natural gifts, and learning that those gifts had been artificially enhanced left them questioning everything they thought they knew. My sister wasn't taking calls, and my parents seemed incapable of processing what had happened. They kept returning to details from her childhood, trying to pinpoint when things had gone wrong or what signs they might have missed. The confusion in their voices revealed just how completely this revelation had shattered their worldview. They'd been so convinced of her superiority that they couldn't reconcile the evidence with their beliefs. The media coverage was relentless and brutal. Music blogs picked apart her past performances, analyzing recordings for evidence of enhancement and questioning the authenticity of achievements our family had celebrated for years. Seeing my sister's reputation destroyed in such a public forum was painful, regardless of our complicated relationship. No one deserved the level of scrutiny and humiliation she was experiencing. What made the situation even more complex was the timing. While my sister's career was imploding, my own international recognition was reaching new heights. Reviews from my European tour were overwhelmingly positive, leading to invitations from prestigious venues that represented the pinnacle of classical music performance. The contrast between our trajectories couldn't have been more stark or emotionally complicated. Returning home after the tour felt like entering a house in mourning. My parents moved through their daily routines like people in shock, unable to adjust to the reality that their musical prodigy narrative had been built on deception. The walls that had once displayed my sister's achievements now felt like monuments to a lie, and the awkwardness of my presence as the successful daughter only intensified their discomfort. My sister had essentially disappeared from public view, refusing interviews and canceling all upcoming performances. The few times I saw her during my visit home, she looked like a completely different person. The confidence that had once defined her had evaporated, replaced by a hollow anxiety that made her seem smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Whatever had driven her to cheat had clearly been eating away at her for a long time. The worst part was watching our parents struggle to figure out how to relate to me in light of everything that had happened. They'd spent so many years dismissing my achievements and focusing on my sister that they seemed incapable of recognizing my success without it feeling like a betrayal of their previous beliefs. Acknowledging my talent meant admitting they'd been wrong about both of us for decades. During one particularly tense dinner, my mother made a comment about how different things might have been if they'd supported both of us equally from the beginning. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of their favoritism that I'd ever heard, but it came too late and felt too much like an attempt to rewrite history rather than take responsibility for their choices. The recording scandal continued to unfold over the following weeks, with new details emerging that painted an even more disturbing picture of the pressure my sister had been under. Stories surfaced about her working with coaches who promised to enhance her abilities through questionable methods, spending enormous amounts of money on treatments and supplements that claimed to improve musical performance. The desperation behind these choices suggested someone who had been struggling far longer than any of us realized. Final update. The truth that finally emerged was more heartbreaking than anyone could have anticipated. During a family meeting that my parents insisted we have to address everything that had happened, my sister revealed the secret she'd been carrying for years. She had a hearing disorder that had been progressively worsening since her teenage years, affecting her ability to hear subtle pitch variations and musical nuances that were crucial for professional performance. The revelation recontextualized everything about our family's dynamic in the most painful way possible. My sister had been living with a condition that made musical performance increasingly difficult, but she'd hidden it because our parents had invested so much in the idea of her being naturally gifted. She knew that admitting to hearing problems would destroy their dream of raising the perfect classical musician, so she'd turned to performance enhancement and technology to compensate for what she couldn't naturally hear anymore. Learning that my sister had been taking stimulants and using technological assistance wasn't just about cheating, it was about survival in a family system that had no room for imperfection. Our parents had created an environment where acknowledging any musical limitation felt like betraying everything they'd worked toward. She'd been trying to preserve their dreams at the expense of her own integrity and health. The hearing disorder explained so many things that had confused me over the years. Her unusual practice habits, the way she'd become increasingly dependent on visual cues during performances, and the anxiety that had seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker as her career progressed. She'd been fighting a losing battle against her own biology while trying to maintain the facade that everything came naturally to her. Our parents' reaction to this revelation was complicated and painful to witness. The anger they'd initially felt about the cheating transformed into guilt as they realized their own role in creating the pressure that had driven her to such desperate measures. They'd been so invested in their narrative about her talent that they'd missed obvious signs that she was struggling with something beyond normal performance anxiety. For me, learning about my sister's hearing disorder changed how I understood our entire childhood. The favoritism I'd experienced hadn't just been unfair. It had been based on a comparison that was never valid to begin with. My parents had been praising natural ability in someone who was actually working twice as hard as anyone realized, while dismissing genuine talent in me because it didn't fit their preconceived ideas about which daughter was destined for greatness. The process of rebuilding our family relationships after these revelations has been slow and complicated. My parents have had to confront the damage caused by their favoritism and unrealistic expectations, while my sister has had to figure out who she is as a person separate from the musical identity that had defined her entire life. None of us emerged from this situation unchanged or unscathed. My own career has continued to flourish in ways that still feel surreal sometimes. The international tours have led to recording contracts, collaborations with renowned orchestras, and opportunities to perform in venues I'd only dreamed about as a child. The success feels meaningful, but it's been complicated by the knowledge that my family's recognition of my achievements came only after my sister's career collapsed rather than through genuine appreciation of my talent. The most unexpected development has been my sister's journey toward finding a new relationship with music. She's been working with specialists to address her hearing disorder and exploring ways to remain involved in the musical world that don't require the level of auditory precision that had become impossible for her. She's shown remarkable resilience in rebuilding her identity around who she actually is rather than who our parents wanted her to be. Our parents have gradually begun to acknowledge their mistakes, though the process has been painful for everyone involved. They've had to accept that their dream of raising a classical music prodigy was based on unrealistic expectations and favoritism that damaged both of their daughters in different ways. The family therapy sessions we've been attending have helped us all understand how toxic dynamics can develop even with the best intentions. Looking back on everything that's happened, I find myself feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years of family dysfunction, for my sister's struggle with a condition she felt she couldn't reveal, and for the opportunities we lost to support each other as siblings. Relief that the truth is finally out, that I no longer have to question my own abilities, and that we all have a chance to build healthier relationships moving forward. The classical music world is smaller than most people realize, and news travels quickly through professional networks. Colleagues have gradually learned about my family situation, and many have shared similar stories about growing up in households where musical achievement became tangled with parental expectations and sibling rivalry. These conversations have helped me understand that our family's dysfunction, while painful, wasn't unique in the pressurized world of classical music education. My sister and I have begun to develop a relationship that isn't defined by competition or comparison for the first time in our lives. Without the weight of our parents' expectations hanging over every interaction, we've discovered that we actually like each other as people. She's funny and insightful in ways I never noticed when we were trapped in roles as competitors rather than siblings. The Carnegie Hall performance that my family skipped now feels like a turning point rather than just a painful memory. That night taught me that I could succeed without their validation, and it gave me the confidence to pursue opportunities that have shaped my entire career. While I wish they had been there to witness that moment, I've learned that their absence said more about their limitations than mine. Today, I'm preparing for another major performance, this time with a different understanding of what success means and who I'm performing for. My family will be in the audience, not because they've finally decided I'm worthy of their attention, but because we've all learned valuable lessons about support, recognition, and the importance of celebrating each other's authentic achievements rather than chasing impossible dreams of perfection.